My name is Alexandra, Alex for short, and I am 32 years old. Most people see a successful clinical psychologist with a nice office in Boston. What they do not see is the 12-year-old girl abandoned at a train station by her own parents as a joke. This morning I woke up to 29 missed calls from a number I did not recognize. Turns out, after 20 years of silence, my parents found me. The people who said, "Let us see how she finds her way home." Before I tell you how my life changed forever that day, drop a comment telling me where you are watching from, and subscribe to hear more stories about finding strength after betrayal. Growing up in suburban Portland, my life looked normal from the outside. We lived in a 2-story colonial, with perfect landscaping in a neighborhood where kids rode bikes freely, and neighbors brought casseroles when someone was sick. My father, Kenneth, worked as an insurance executive, bringing home a comfortable salary that afforded us family vacations and a new car every 3 years. My mother, Margot, ran her own interior design business, decorating the homes of Portland's upper middle class with her signature blend of classic and contemporary styles. To anyone watching, we seemed like the perfect American family. Dad coached Little League on weekends. Mom volunteered for the PTA. I got good grades and participated in school plays. But behind our freshly painted front door lived a different reality altogether. My parents' relationship was volatile at best. They competed with each other in strange ways, turning everyday situations into contests of will and manipulation. These games eventually extended to me, their only child. What started as occasional pranks evolved into something much more concerning as I grew older. I remember clearly the first time I realized something was wrong. I was 5 years old, sitting at our kitchen table eating cereal before kindergarten. My parents exchanged glances across their coffee cups before my father cleared his throat. "Alex, we need to tell you something important," he said, his face serious. "You are adopted. Your real parents did not want you, but we took you in." My spoon clattered against the bowl as tears filled my eyes. I did not understand what adopted meant exactly, but I knew from his tone it was bad. I sobbed uncontrollably until my mother finally laughed and said, "April Fools, you should see your face right now." It was April 1st. They thought it was hilarious. I spent the rest of the day at school wondering if maybe it was actually true. 2 years later, my mother took me shopping at the large mall downtown. While browsing through a department store, she suddenly vanished. I searched frantically, calling for her through racks of clothing, panic rising in my chest. After nearly 3 hours, a security guard found me crying near the food court and was about to call police when my mother appeared. "There you are," she exclaimed, as if I had been the one who disappeared. "Did you learn your lesson about independence today?" The guard looked uncomfortable, but said nothing. On the drive home, my mother explained that I needed to learn how to handle myself when alone. "The world is tough, Alex. You need to toughen up too." At 9, my parents pretended to drive away without me after a family day at the park. I ran after the car for nearly half a mile, lungs burning, convinced I had been forgotten before they pulled over, laughing at my desperation. When I was 10, they locked me outside in 30-degree weather as a survival challenge, forcing me to find shelter in our garden shed for 2 hours before letting me back in. They called these incidents life lessons designed to build character and resilience. My grandmother, Eleanor, occasionally visited from Seattle, her brow furrowing when she witnessed these interactions. Once I overheard her arguing with my father, her son. "Kenneth, this is not normal parenting," she said, voice tight with concern. "The girl is walking on eggshells around you both." "Mother, you coddled me, and look how that turned out," my father replied dismissively. "Alexandra needs to learn how the real world works. No one is going to hold her hand through life." My Aunt Patricia, my father's sister, was the only one who consistently showed concern. When she visited from Seattle, she would pull me aside and ask careful questions about how things were at home. I learned quickly to downplay everything, afraid that complaining would only make things worse. At school, I became known as the perfect student. I raised my hand for every question, completed assignments early, and never caused trouble. My teachers praised my maturity and focus, unaware that these behaviors stemmed from my desperate need to control something in my life. If I could be perfect at school, maybe I could avoid becoming the target of my parents' games at home. Despite my efforts, I developed persistent anxiety. I had trouble sleeping, startling at small noises, and constantly checking that my bedroom door was locked. I became hypervigilant, always watching for signs of my parents' next lesson. Books became my escape worlds, where I could disappear for hours into stories with predictable endings and characters who made sense. In 6th grade, my teacher, Mrs. Reynolds, noticed something was wrong. After class one day, she asked me to stay behind her kind eyes, studying my face. "Alexandra, is everything okay at home?" she asked gently. "Yes, everything is fine," I replied automatically, the practiced response ready on my lips. "You know, some parents have unusual ways of teaching lessons," she continued carefully. "Ways that might be confusing or scary for children." I felt my heart race, but maintained my calm exterior. "My parents just want me to be strong," I explained, repeating what I had been told countless times. Mrs. Reynolds nodded, but slipped me a pamphlet about youth resources that I quickly hid in my backpack. That night, I read it under my covers, with a flashlight, learning, for the first time, that what my parents called toughening up had another name: emotional abuse. As summer approached before 7th grade, my father announced we would take a family vacation to Seattle. I was cautiously excited, hoping this might be a normal trip like other families enjoyed. I packed carefully, including my favorite books and the journal Mrs. Reynolds had given me at the end of the school year. "Seattle has wonderful museums and the Space Needle," my mother said, as we drove north on Interstate 5, "and we can visit Grandma Eleanor and Aunt Patricia." For the first time in months, I allowed myself to hope that maybe things were changing. Maybe this trip would be different. I had no idea that this vacation would become the dividing line between my old life and everything that came after. The Seattle trip started surprisingly well. We spent our first day visiting Pike Place Market, watching fishmongers toss salmon through the air, and sampling fresh berries from local farms. My father seemed relaxed, laughing at street performers and buying me a handmade bracelet from an artisan's stall. My mother took dozens of photos, directing us to pose in front of the original Starbucks and beside the famous bronze pig statue. On our second day, we visited the Space Needle, riding the elevator to the observation deck, where I pressed my face against the glass, amazed at the panoramic view of the city, Puget Sound, and distant mountains. My parents stood close together, pointing out landmarks, and actually holding hands. I took mental photographs of these moments, storing them away as evidence that we could be a normal family. After visiting several museums, we stopped for lunch at a seafood restaurant near King Street Station, the historic train terminal in downtown Seattle. I ordered clam chowder in a sourdough bread bowl, savoring each bite and the relative peace at our table. "That is quite a beautiful old train station across the street," my father remarked as we waited for our dessert. "Alexandra, you have been reading about architecture in those books of yours. Why do not you go explore it while we finish our coffee? We will meet you inside in 15 minutes. The suggestion seemed innocent enough. The station was just across the street, and I was almost 13, certainly old enough to explore a public building alone for a few minutes. I nodded, eagerly pleased by my father's acknowledgement of my interest in architecture. King Street Station was indeed impressive, with its ornate ceiling and grand clock tower reminiscent of European design. I wandered through the main hall, admiring the marble floors and restored wooden benches where travelers waited for their trains. The station was moderately busy that summer afternoon, with tourists and commuters moving purposefully through the space. "You can go check out the platforms too," my mother suggested, suddenly appearing beside me. I hadn't heard them enter the station. "There is an interesting old train on track 7. Your father and I need to use the restroom, but we will meet you back at the main entrance in a few minutes." I nodded and headed toward the platforms, following signs for track 7. The platform stretched into the distance, but I did not see any special historic train, just a regular Amtrak passenger train preparing for departure. Confused, I turned back toward the main hall, expecting to find my parents waiting. They were gone. At first I assumed they were still in the restrooms, so I waited near the entrance watching the minutes tick by on the large station clock. 5 minutes passed. Then, 10. After 15 minutes, I began walking through the station, checking every corner restroom entrance and waiting area. "Mom, Dad," I called, trying to keep my voice steady, despite the familiar knot of anxiety tightening in my stomach. I approached a woman with a kind face. "Excuse me, have you seen a couple?" A tall man with gray at his temples, and a woman with short blonde hair, wearing a blue dress. She shook her head sympathetically. "Sorry, honey. Are you lost?" "No, I am just trying to find my parents. They said they would meet me here." After 30 minutes of searching, I returned to the restaurant where we had eaten lunch. Perhaps there had been a misunderstanding about where to meet. "The couple with the young girl," the hostess said when I described my parents. "They paid their bill about 45 minutes ago. Left a good tip, too." A cold realization began to settle over me. This was another lesson, another joke, but on a scale far beyond anything they had done before. We were in Seattle, nearly 200 miles from home, in a city where I knew only my grandmother and aunt, neither of whose phone numbers I had memorized. I returned to the station and sat on a bench near the entrance, fighting back tears as I watched the afternoon sun begin its descent. Surely they would return soon. This could not possibly be more than a cruel joke meant to scare me for an hour or so. As the station began to empty with the approach of evening, a security guard named Franklin approached me, concern evident in his weathered face. "Young lady, are you waiting for someone? The station will be closing to non-passengers soon." I tried to maintain my composure as I explained the situation, but my voice cracked. "My parents told me to meet them here, but they have not come back. We are visiting from Portland." The guard's expression shifted from concern to alarm. "How long have you been waiting?" "About 4 hours now," I admitted, tears finally spilling down my cheeks. "Do you have their cell phone number?" he asked gently. I nodded and recited my father's number, which I had been forced to memorize in case of emergency. The guard used his phone to dial, but there was no answer. He tried 3 more times over the next hour with the same result. As night fell completely, Franklin escorted me to the station's security office and contacted the police. Officer Julia arrived, a woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense attitude, who brought me a sandwich and a soda from the vending machine. "Alexandra, we are going to figure this out," she assured me. "This is not your fault." The police tried calling my parents repeatedly. They checked nearby hotels and left messages at my grandmother's house, which I knew was somewhere in Seattle but couldn't direct them to. Finally, around 11 that night, nearly 9 hours after I had last seen them, my father answered his phone. I could hear only Officer Julia's side of the conversation, but her face told me everything I needed to know. "Sir, we have your daughter at King Street Station security office." "Yes, she has been here since this afternoon." "No, sir, that is not." "Sir, leaving a 12-year-old alone in a city 200 miles from home is not a reasonable. I understand that is your perspective, but..." She covered the phone and took a deep breath before continuing. "Mr. Wallace, I need you to come to King Street Station immediately to pick up your daughter." "No, this is not optional." "Yes, we are considering this a child welfare issue." When she hung up, she sat beside me on the small office couch. "Your father says they are at a hotel about 20 minutes away. They are coming to get you now." "What did he say?" I asked, my voice small. "Why did they leave me?" Officer Julia chose her words carefully. "He said they were teaching you independence, that you knew how to get home, and they wanted to see if you would figure it out." The betrayal washed over me in waves. They had abandoned me in a strange city with no money, no phone, and no way to get home as a test, as a joke, to see if I could find my way back to Portland on my own. "Would they have come back if I had not been found by security?" I asked. Officer Julia's silence was answer enough. I spent that night in the police station break room, curled under a scratchy blanket on a couch that smelled faintly of coffee and fast food. Officer Julia checked on me hourly, bringing me water, and assuring me that everything would be okay, though her tight smile suggested otherwise. Morning arrived with harsh fluorescent lighting, and the arrival of Marcus, a child services worker with tired eyes and a gentle voice. He sat across from me with a clipboard and asked questions about my life at home. The jokes, the lessons, the times I had been left alone or frightened, as part of my parents' unique approach to child rearing. "Alexandra, what you are describing is concerning," Marcus said carefully. "Has anyone ever talked to you about emotional abuse?" The pamphlet Mrs. Reynolds had given me flashed in my mind. My teacher gave me something to read about it once. Marcus nodded. "Your parents' behavior falls into that category. Children need security and trust to develop properly, not fear and uncertainty." Our conversation was interrupted by the arrival of my parents. My mother wore large sunglasses, despite the indoor setting, and my father's face was fixed in the tight smile he used when dealing with service workers he considered beneath him. They did not rush to hug me or express relief at finding me safe. Instead, they nodded curtly at Officer Julia and Marcus. "This has been a tremendous overreaction," my father said immediately. "Alexandra is perfectly capable of finding her way home. She has emergency money, knows our phone number, and understands public transportation." This was a valuable life lesson that has been turned into a needless drama. My mother nodded in agreement. We were nearby the entire time, checking on her periodically. She was never in any danger. Officer Julia's expression hardened. "Mr. and Mrs. Wallace security camera footage shows you left the station and did not return. Your daughter was alone for nearly 9 hours in a major city far from home." "We were teaching her independence," my father insisted. "Children today are coddled into helplessness. Alexandra needs to learn self-reliance." "By abandoning her in another city," Marcus interjected. "Sir, I will be opening a case file with Child Protective Services. This goes beyond questionable parenting choices into neglect and emotional abuse." My parents' faces registered shock, then outrage. This was not how their lessons typically ended. Usually I simply endured whatever tests they had devised, learned to be more vigilant, more prepared, more perfect. Official intervention was never part of the equation. The drive back to Portland was silent and tense. My mother stared out the window, while my father gripped the steering wheel so tightly, his knuckles turned white. I sat in the back seat as far away from them, as the confines of the car would allow, watching the landscape blur by, and wondering what would happen next. At home, the silence broke into something worse. My parents began speaking about me as if I was not present, their voices filled with resentment. "This is what happens when you take things too far," my mother said to my father in the kitchen that evening. "I told you the train station was excessive." "You agreed to the plan," my father shot back. "Do not pretend this was all my idea now that it has backfired." From my hiding spot around the corner, I realized something important. They knew they had crossed a line. Not because they recognized the harm they had caused me, but because they had finally attracted outside attention to their behavior. The following days brought a flurry of activity. My Aunt Patricia drove down from Seattle, after hearing what had happened, her face tight, with barely controlled anger as she hugged me fiercely in our living room. "I always knew something was wrong," she whispered. "I should have done more sooner." Mrs. Reynolds was contacted by Child Services, confirming she had noticed concerning patterns in my behavior that suggested home problems. A caseworker named Diane began making regular visits to our house, during which my parents transformed into perfect concerned caregivers, expressing appropriate remorse and promising to attend parenting classes and family therapy. "We got carried away with our desire to raise a resilient child," my mother explained smoothly to Diane. "We never meant any harm." But in private, their resentment simmered. I became the cause of their problems, the reason strangers were invading their privacy and questioning their parenting. Notes were left on my bedroom door, reminding me to tell the truth to caseworkers, the unspoken threat clear in every word. Sleep became nearly impossible as nightmares of being abandoned in increasingly terrifying locations plagued me nightly. I began hiding small amounts of food in my room, preparing for some future abandonment that felt inevitable. With Aunt Patricia's quiet help, I gathered important documents like my birth certificate and social security card, tucking them into a waterproof pouch hidden in my closet. School became my only sanctuary. Mrs. Reynolds had moved up to teach 7th grade, and she kept a protective eye on me, allowing me to eat lunch in her classroom when the noise and chaos of the cafeteria became too much. I threw myself into studies with renewed intensity, as if perfect grades might somehow fix the broken foundation of my life. 3 months after the train station incident, I overheard a conversation that changed everything. My parents were in their home office door slightly ajar, unaware I was passing by in the hallway. The Westbrook Academy has agreed to consider her application, despite the late submission, my father was saying. Their behavioral modification program has excellent results with problem children. Is it really necessary to send her to boarding school? My mother asked, though her tone suggested the question was merely perfunctory. She has turned our private family matters into public spectacle, my father replied. The school will give her structure and discipline away from the soft influences that have been encouraging her attitude problem. Besides, it gets child services off our backs if she is in a respected educational institution. I stood frozen in the hallway, ice spreading through my veins. Boarding school, behavioral modification, problem child. The words swirled in my mind as I silently retreated to my room. That night, I made a decision that would alter the course of my life forever. I could not continue living with parents who saw me as a problem to be fixed rather than a child to be loved. Whatever came next could not possibly be worse than waiting for the next lesson, the next abandonment, the next betrayal, by the very people who should have protected me. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. Just 2 weeks after overhearing their boarding school plans, my parents left for a weekend real estate investment seminar in San Francisco. The moment their car disappeared down our street, I called Aunt Patricia from the kitchen phone. "I need help," I said simply when she answered. "They are planning to send me away to a behavioral modification school. I cannot stay here anymore." There was only the briefest pause before she responded. "Pack what you absolutely need. I will be there in 3 hours." At 13, my understanding of the legal system was limited, but Aunt Patricia had clearly done her research. She arrived as promised, helped me gather my hidden documents and a single suitcase of belongings, and drove me straight to her attorney's office in downtown Portland. "We are filing for emergency temporary custody," she explained, as we sat in the wood-paneled waiting room. "Based on the existing child services case and the train station incident, we have grounds to request immediate removal." The next week passed in a blur of legal terminology and courthouse visits. I testified in a small room with just a judge and court-appointed advocate present, describing not only the train station abandonment, but the years of jokes and lessons that preceded it. My voice shook at first but grew stronger, as I spoke the truth pouring out after years of careful silence. My parents arrived from their trip to find me gone, and a court summons waiting. Their reaction was explosive, a barrage of angry phone calls and threats of police involvement for kidnapping. But the system for once worked as it should. The judge granted temporary custody to Aunt Patricia pending a full hearing, and I moved to her apartment in Seattle, enrolling in a new school district before my parents could implement their boarding school plan. The custody hearing was scheduled for the following month. My parents arrived with an expensive attorney who attempted to paint them as concerned conventional parents and me as a troubled, manipulative teenager. The Wallaces have provided a stable home, private education, and numerous opportunities for their daughter, the lawyer argued smoothly. One parenting misstep, which they have acknowledged and expressed remorse for, should not sever this family bond. But the evidence told a different story. My journal entries dating back years, Mrs. Reynolds' documentation of concerning behaviors, the police and security reports from King Street Station, the psychological evaluation showing significant anxiety and hypervigilance consistent with emotional abuse. When the judge announced his decision to grant extended custody to Aunt Patricia for 6 months, with mandatory family therapy, before any reconsideration, my father's face flushed dark red. My mother stared straight ahead, her expression unreadable behind her designer sunglasses. "This is ridiculous," my father hissed as they passed our table. "You will regret this dramatic performance, Alexandra." But for the first time, his words held no power over me. I was beyond his reach physically and emotionally. The realization was both terrifying and exhilarating. Life with Aunt Patricia was an education in what normal family relationships could be. She knocked before entering my room. She asked my opinion on meals and weekend activities. When I flinched at sudden movements or apologized excessively for minor mistakes, she never made me feel embarrassed or weak. "Recovery takes time," she would say gently. "Your reactions make perfect sense given what you have experienced." My new school counselor connected me with Dr. Lillian, a therapist specializing in childhood trauma. Our weekly sessions became anchors in my new life-safe spaces to untangle the twisted logic of my upbringing and begin the slow process of trusting again. "What your parents did was about their own issues, not your worth, doctor," Lillian explained. "Children are not supposed to earn basic safety and care through perfect behavior or passing tests." Initially, my parents fought aggressively for custody filing motions and demanding hearings. But when the court ordered psychological evaluations for them as well, their enthusiasm waned noticeably. The process was becoming too much trouble, as my father put it in a voicemail to Aunt Patricia. 6 months after moving to Seattle, I received the news that would cement my new beginning. My parents had decided to relocate to Florida for a fresh start. "They are not contesting the custody extension," Aunt Patricia explained carefully. "They have accepted a job offer in Jacksonville and will be moving next month." They did not say goodbye. No phone call, no letter, not even a message passed through their attorney. They simply packed up our Portland house and disappeared from my life as completely as they had from King Street Station a year earlier. With the court's approval and my parents' implicit consent through their absence, I legally changed my last name from Wallace to Harrison, taking Aunt Patricia's surname as my own. It felt like shedding a skin that no longer fit, becoming someone new, while still carrying the lessons of the past. High school brought new challenges and opportunities. Therapy continued, and slowly, the nightmares decreased. I made real friends for the first time: Zoe from my advanced placement classes and Rachel from the school newspaper. They knew fragments of my story and respected the boundaries I still needed, never pushing for sleepovers I was not ready for, or questioning why certain topics made me uncomfortable. Academics remained my strength and sanctuary. I graduated as valedictorian, earning a substantial scholarship to the University of Washington's psychology program. My interest in the field was anything but random. I wanted to understand the minds that could justify cruelty as care and, more importantly, help others who had experienced similar betrayals. Throughout college, Aunt Patricia remained my rock, attending every parent weekend event and celebration, beaming with genuine pride at my achievements. When I was accepted to a prestigious graduate program in Boston, she encouraged me to go despite the distance it would put between us. "You deserve to build exactly the life you want," she said firmly. "I will always be here, no matter how far you roam." The last contact I had with my parents came shortly after my 18th birthday. A terse email arrived from an unfamiliar address, the message brief and devoid of warmth. "We have been informed you are now legally an adult. We did our best with a difficult child. Perhaps someday you will understand the value of the independence we tried to instill. Your father has a new position, with significant responsibilities. Your mother has opened a design studio in Jacksonville. Address changes enclosed for your records. No questions about my life. No congratulations on college acceptance. No acknowledgement of the pain they had caused." I showed the email to Dr. Lillian, who helped me draft a brief final response. "I am well and building a good life. I do not wish further contact. Please respect this boundary." They did for 20 years. Boston welcomed me with brick buildings, autumn leaves, and blessed anonymity. No one there knew me as the abandoned girl or the troubled teenager. I was simply Alexandra Harrison, graduate student in clinical psychology, with a focus on childhood trauma and resilience. My apartment building in Somerville housed mostly students and young professionals, including my roommate Danielle, a law student, with a boisterous laugh and unwavering respect for personal space. Through her, I met a circle of friends who accepted my carefully constructed boundaries without question, never pushing for details about my family when I mentioned only my aunt in Seattle. For the first time, I experimented with trusting people beyond the essential minimum. I joined a book club, volunteered at a local animal shelter, and even dated occasionally, though relationships remained challenging territory. The hypervigilance that had protected me as a child made romantic connections difficult. I analyzed every interaction for hidden meanings, waiting for the joke or test that never came. Michael, a fellow psychology student I dated for nearly a year, was patient with these tendencies. "Your radar for inconsistency is actually quite impressive," he would say, without judgment, when I noticed subtle shifts in tone or expression that others missed. Though our relationship eventually ended when he took a position across the country, it taught me that intimacy was possible, even with my complicated history. My professional life flourished more easily than my personal one. I completed my doctorate with distinction, my dissertation on emotional abuse and resilience factors, drawing attention from leaders in the field. A position at a respected trauma center followed, where I specialized in working with children and adolescents from unstable homes. "You have an unusual ability to connect with these kids," my supervisor noted during an evaluation. "They sense you understand in a way textbooks cannot teach." I never disclosed my personal history to patients, maintaining appropriate professional boundaries, but my experiences informed my approach. I knew firsthand the shame that kept children silent, the confusing love that could exist alongside fear, the desperate need to believe parents' harmful behavior was somehow deserved or necessary. At 28, I purchased my first apartment, a small but sun-filled space near the Boston Common. The day I signed the mortgage papers, I called Aunt Patricia. "I bought a place with actual roots," I told, her voice thick with emotion. "I am not renting anymore. I am staying." "Oh, Alexandra," she replied, understanding the significance immediately. "I am so proud of the woman you have become." Each year, on the anniversary of the train station incident, I developed a ritual of self-care rather than self-destruction. I took the day off work, visited a museum or botanical garden, ate at a restaurant I loved, and wrote in my journal about the progress of the past year. What had once been the worst day of my life became, paradoxically, a marker of my strength and growth. Professional recognition came in waves. An award for innovative therapy approaches an invitation to speak at conferences, publication in respected journals. My research paper on the long-term effects of emotional abuse and tough love parenting approaches gained particular attention, cited frequently by others in the field. Weekends often found me volunteering at a youth shelter, leading art therapy sessions, or simply providing stable adult presence for teens in crisis. Many reminded me of myself at their age, and while maintaining professional distance, I made sure they heard the message I had needed so desperately: none of this is your fault, and your story is not over. A decade after leaving Seattle, I was promoted to clinical director at the trauma center, overseeing a team of therapists and developing new treatment protocols. My office wall displayed my degrees and certifications, but also a small watercolor painting given to me by a 14-year-old client on her last day of therapy. "You helped me find my voice," she had written on the back. Those words meant more than any professional accolade. Aunt Patricia visited Boston twice yearly, and I returned to Seattle for major holidays. During one Christmas visit, we had a conversation that shifted something fundamental within me. "Have you ever thought about forgiveness?" she asked as we sat before her fireplace, mugs of hot chocolate warming our hands. "Forgiveness seems like something they would have to earn," I replied carefully, "and they have never even acknowledged what they did was wrong." Aunt Patricia nodded thoughtfully. "True forgiveness is not about them deserving it. It is about freeing yourself from carrying their weight. You can forgive without reconciling or allowing them back into your life." I considered her words for a long time. I think I have forgiven them in some ways. I understand they were broken people acting from their own damage, but I have no desire to have them in my life again. That is perfectly valid, she assured me. I just want to make sure you are building your life from joy rather than reaction. You deserve every happiness, Alexandra. When Aunt Patricia was diagnosed with breast cancer the following year, I took extended leave to care for her through treatment. Sitting beside her during chemotherapy sessions, I realized how thoroughly she had shown me what real family meant, not blood or obligation, but consistent care and unconditional support. Promise me something, she said during one difficult night when pain kept her awake. Promise you will not let fear of becoming like them stop you from having your own family someday if that is what you want. I squeezed her hand throat tight. I promise. After her recovery, I returned to Boston with renewed purpose. I adopted a rescue dog, a gentle golden retriever mix named Bailey, who needed someone as much as I had once needed Aunt Patricia. Together we explored the city parks and beaches, his uncomplicated affection, healing parts of me I hadn't realized were still broken. Work continued to provide fulfillment and purpose. I developed a specialization in helping adults who, like me, were estranged from family due to abuse or neglect. These clients often carried unnecessary guilt for choosing self-preservation over toxic relationships, and I helped them recognize the courage such choices required. In my late 30s, I met James, an architectural historian, who approached relationships with honesty and patience that disarmed my usual defenses. On our fifth date, when family backgrounds inevitably arose in conversation, I shared more of my story than I typically revealed. My parents abandoned me at a train station when I was 12 as a test. I have not seen them in 20 years. James did not offer platitudes or press for details. Instead, he simply asked, "What do you need from me around this topic?" His response, so different from the uncomfortable pity or morbid curiosity I usually encountered, allowed something to relax within me. Our relationship developed slowly but steadily, built on mutual respect and clear communication. 10 years without contact from my parents stretched to 15, then 20. I stopped checking over my shoulder or flinching when the phone rang unexpectedly. The nightmares reduced to rare occurrences rather than regular visitors. I built a life full of meaning, purpose, and genuine connection. The pieces of my broken childhood repurposed into something strong and beautiful. Then, Aunt Patricia died after a cancer recurrence, and everything changed. The memorial service was small but meaningful, held in a Seattle garden that Aunt Patricia had loved. I delivered the eulogy with James beside me, my voice steady, as I described the woman who had saved me in every way a person can be saved. The local newspaper ran a brief obituary, noting her community service and dedication to children's causes, ending with, "Obiston. She is survived by her beloved niece Alexandra Harrison of Boston." 6 months later, on a Monday morning in April, I woke to an unfamiliar sound. My phone was vibrating continuously on the nightstand, notifications stacking up faster than I could process. 29 missed calls from an unknown Florida number. 3 voicemails. Multiple text messages. I sat up in bed, heart pounding, as I played the first voicemail. "Alexandra, this is your father. We need to talk. It has been too long. Call me back at this number." His voice, barely changed after 20 years, sent a physical shock through my system. My hands began trembling so violently I dropped the phone onto the bedroom carpet. James found me there minutes later, still staring at the device as if it might explode. "Alex, what happened?" "My parents," I managed to say. "They found me." The next hours passed in a blur of anxiety and confusion. More calls came, which I did not answer. An email arrived from my mother, claiming a family emergency required immediate contact. Messages appeared on my professional social media accounts from cousins. I barely remembered expressing sudden interest in reconnecting. With James's steady support, I began investigating rather than reacting. The obituary had provided my full name and city enough for determined people to track me down in the age of digital footprints. A quick online search revealed my father had likely hired a private investigator, as he had recently posted in a local Jacksonville forum, seeking recommendations for locating estranged family members. "You do not have to respond to any of this," James reminded me, as we sat at my kitchen table that evening, Bailey's head resting supportively on my knee. 20 years of silence, and now they demand immediate attention. You owe them nothing. My therapist, Dr. Cameron, agreed during our emergency session the following day. "This is about your well-being, Alexandra, not their desires. What do you actually want in this situation?" The question was more difficult than it should have been. Logically, I wanted nothing to do with the people who had caused so much pain and never taken responsibility. Emotionally complicated tendrils of curiosity and unresolved questions pulled at me. What did they want? After all this time, had they changed? Did they ever recognize the harm they had caused? A letter arrived 3 days after the initial call's thick cream stationery with my mother's flowing handwriting on the envelope. Inside were 4 pages of explanation and justification. "We were young parents who believed in raising independent children," she wrote. "Society has changed its views on parenting approaches, but our intentions were always good. We have grown and learned over the years. Your father has had health challenges that have given us perspective on what truly matters." Not once in 4 pages did the words sorry or apologize appear. No acknowledgement of abandonment or abuse, only references to misunderstandings and different approaches to parenting. The final paragraph revealed their true motivation. "Family should stick together as we age. Your father's condition has made us realize the importance of reconnection. Several cousins and your Uncle William have also expressed interest in healing this family rift." I had never been close to Uncle William, my father's younger brother, or the cousins who now suddenly reached out. Their messages carried subtle pressure, framing me as the obstacle to family harmony rather than the child who had been discarded. "You should at least hear them out," wrote a cousin, named Rachel, whom I had not seen since elementary school. "People can change, and family is family." The pressure intensified when I consulted an attorney about establishing legal boundaries. The lawyer advised me that while I could pursue a restraining order, if actual harassment occurred, simply making contact attempts was not illegal. My parents had carefully positioned themselves as concerned family members seeking reconciliation, not as the abusers I knew them to be. I could set up an email address, specifically for limited communication, I suggested to Dr. Cameron during our next session. That way I control the boundaries without complete refusal, which seems to be escalating their efforts. She nodded thoughtfully. "That might be a reasonable compromise for your own peace of mind. Remember, though, you can change your mind at any point. Your boundaries are valid." The dedicated email account seemed to satisfy my parents temporarily. Their messages came regularly, a mix of superficial updates about their Florida life and increasingly direct requests for phone conversations or in-person meetings. Each message revealed more about their unchanged nature. They dismissed my boundaries as still being dramatic after all these years and framed my caution as unreasonable given their health situation. "Your father has had cardiac issues," my mother wrote. "He needs family support during this difficult time. Surely you have moved beyond teenage grudges by now." The characterization of severe emotional abuse as teenage grudges confirmed what I suspected: they had not changed at all. They still refused to acknowledge reality, still manipulated situations to their advantage, still expected me to fulfill their needs regardless of the cost to myself. Then came the call from Boston Memorial Hospital. Somehow, my father had listed me as his emergency contact during a cardiology consultation while visiting Boston, a fact I discovered only when the hospital called about scheduling his follow-up appointment. "Mr. Wallace was quite insistent we reach you," the scheduler explained. "He said you would want to be involved in his care plan." The manipulation was so transparent, it would have been laughable if it wasn't so disturbing. They had traveled across the country to my city, used my contact information without permission, and attempted to force connection through medical necessity. I declined to be involved and immediately contacted the hospital's patient advocacy department, to have my information removed from their records. The incident, however, highlighted the escalating nature of their contact attempts. What would they try next? The internal conflict was exhausting. Part of me, the trained psychologist, understood the dynamics at play with clinical clarity. Another part, the abandoned child who had once desperately wanted parental love, experienced emotional turmoil that no professional knowledge could fully resolve. A colleague who specialized in family reconciliation offered valuable perspective over coffee one afternoon. Reconciliation requires several elements to be successful, she explained. Acknowledgement of harm, genuine remorse, changed behavior, and respect for boundaries. From what you have described, your parents have demonstrated none of these. I spent evenings researching adult children, reconnecting with abusive parents, reading accounts of both healing reconciliations and devastating re-engagements that resulted in fresh trauma. The common factor in positive outcomes was the parents' willingness to take full responsibility without excuses or minimization. After weeks of mounting pressure and boundary violations, I reached a decision point. Continuing to ignore the situation was creating more stress than addressing it directly. Perhaps a single controlled interaction would provide the clarity needed to move forward, whether that meant establishing permanent boundaries or considering limited contact on my terms. I chose a public park near my office for our meeting, selecting a Tuesday afternoon, when the space would be neither empty nor crowded. James waited nearby at a cafe within eyesight, ready to intervene if needed, but giving me space to handle this myself. My therapist and I had prepared extensively, developing strategies for maintaining emotional equilibrium and clear boundaries throughout the interaction. Seeing my parents in person after 20 years was surreal. My father had aged dramatically, his once commanding presence diminished by time and health issues. His hair had thinned to wisps of white, and his shoulders hunched slightly forward. My mother had fought aging more successfully through what appeared to be multiple cosmetic procedures, her face oddly smooth and expressionless, despite the emotional context. "Alexandra," my mother said, stepping forward as if to embrace me. I took a subtle step back, maintaining physical distance. "I prefer to be called Alex now," I replied evenly, gesturing toward the bench I had selected. "We can sit here and talk for 30 minutes. The conversation began with their rehearsed expressions of how much they had missed me and how unfortunate the misunderstanding had been all those years ago. My father spoke about his cardiac condition in detail, emphasizing the fear and vulnerability of serious health concerns. "It makes a man reflect on family," he said, his voice carrying the same authoritative tone. I remembered, though weaker now. "We are not getting any younger, Alexandra. Alex." I listened without interrupting, observing their familiar patterns with the detached clarity that years of distance and professional training had provided. They spoke about reconciliation without acknowledgement, healing without accountability, family obligations without recognition of the trust they had shattered. When they finished, I asked the question that had followed me for 20 years. "Do you understand why what you did at King Street Station was wrong? Not because it attracted outside attention or created legal problems, but because of the impact it had on me as your child." My mother looked genuinely confused. "We have already explained that we were nearby watching. It was never meant to be traumatic. You were always so sensitive." "We may have gone a bit far that day," my father conceded with the air of someone making a significant concession. "But these modern ideas about parenting have gone soft. Look at you, a successful professional. Our methods clearly worked." I took a deep breath. "I am successful, despite your methods, not because of them. I succeeded because Aunt Patricia showed me what healthy love looks like, and because I worked through the trauma you caused in therapy for years." Their expressions hardened at the mention of Aunt Patricia, the family betrayer in their narrative. "Your aunt always coddled you," my mother said dismissively. "She never understood our parenting philosophy." "What you call a parenting philosophy, the law calls emotional abuse and child endangerment," I replied calmly. I needed to feel safe, not constantly tested and abandoned. The conversation circled without progress, until I finally asked directly, "Why are you really here? After 20 years of no contact, what do you actually want?" My father cleared his throat, exchanging glances with my mother. "Well, as we mentioned, health concerns have made us reprioritize. We are planning to relocate from Florida as the climate no longer suits my condition. Boston has excellent medical facilities and with your connections here." The truth emerged in halting fragments. My father's condition, while requiring management, was not the crisis they had implied. What they really wanted was practical and financial support as they aged. My mother had researched my professional standing and property ownership. They had identified me as a potential caretaker and resource, not because of genuine remorse or desire for relationship, but out of pragmatic self-interest. "So, to be clear," I said, "when they finished, you abandoned me at 12, showed no interest in my life for 20 years, and now expect me to help support you in your retirement." "Family takes care of family," my mother replied, as if stating an obvious truth. "Despite our differences, blood remains blood." In that moment, something settled within me. The last lingering questions were answered. They had not changed. They would never acknowledge the reality of what they had done. They would always prioritize their needs, above all else. I stood up, surprising them mid-sentence about potential housing options near my neighborhood. "I will not be providing financial support or caregiving. I will not be part of your relocation plans. Our meeting is over." "You cannot simply walk away from family responsibility," my father protested, rising from the bench with effort, "after everything we gave you growing up." I turned back to face them one last time. "What you gave me was trauma that took years to overcome. What you taught me was that I deserve better than relationships built on manipulation and fear. I have built a life and family based on respect and love. I am not walking away from family responsibility. I am honoring my responsibility to the family I chose and created." As I walked toward James waiting at the cafe, my mother called after me, "You will regret this when you are older and alone." I did not look back. That evening, sitting in my living room with James and Bailey, a memory surfaced of my last conversation with Aunt Patricia before her death. "True family is built on actions, not blood," she had told me. "You have created a beautiful family of choice, Alexandra. Never doubt that you are worthy of the love you have found." In the following weeks, I worked with my attorney to establish clear legal boundaries, sending a formal cease and desist letter regarding any further contact attempts. I wrote a final email explaining my decision and the specific harmful patterns that remained unchanged in their behavior. Then I blocked their numbers, email addresses, and social media accounts, closing the door firmly on that chapter of my life. My friends organized a chosen family celebration, bringing together the people who had become my true support system over the years. Colleagues, friends, James, neighbors who had become close confidants, even former clients who had become friends after completing therapy. We gathered in my backyard on a perfect summer evening, sharing food and stories and genuine connection. With professional guidance, I developed a ritual to release the last tendrils of obligation I felt toward my biological parents. I wrote everything I had ever wanted to say to them in a letter I never sent, then burned it in a small ceremony attended by James and my closest friends. As the pages turned to ash, I felt a weight lifting that I had carried for decades. My work with trauma survivors took on new dimensions as I integrated this final chapter of my own healing journey. I spoke more openly with clients about the possibility of choosing family and setting boundaries with harmful relatives, offering living proof that blood connections are not obligations when they cause harm. The journey from abandoned child to empowered woman had been long and often painful, but standing on the other side, I felt profound gratitude for the life I had built. The 12-year-old girl waiting in King Street Station would never have imagined the future that awaited her, the strength she would discover, or the love she would eventually find. Today, 20 years and 3 months after being left at that train station, I am no longer waiting for anyone to return for me. I am no longer searching for approval or validation from those who cannot give it. I am home in the fullest sense of the word, surrounded by people who choose me every day, just as I choose them. Have you ever had to make the difficult decision to create boundaries with family members who caused harm? What helped you find the strength to prioritize your own well-being? Please share your experiences in the comments below, and subscribe to hear more stories about finding healing after betrayal. Remember that your worth is not determined by those who failed to see it, and sometimes the family we create matters more than the one we were born into. Thank you for listening to my story, and I wish you peace and healing on your own journey.